The Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Michael Masutha, has co-hosted a fundraising gala dinner with the South African National Council for the Blind last Thursday. This in recognition of the contribution of the blind and the partially sighted towards South Africa's social justice, transformation and development agenda. The aim of the gala dinner was to raise funds to assist all 22 special public schools for the blind in South Africa with adaptive and assistive learning devices, library resources and other amenities. And now to talk about this and more, we're joined by Eugine Modori Matshwane, the Acting National Executive Director at the South African National Council for the Blind. A very good morning to you, Eugine. Thank you so much for joining us. Just what is important for government to pay attention to schools that cater for children with special needs?
Very, very, very important, sir, because this school falls within the category of the ones which were deprived in the past. And now to determine access in terms of technology and assistive devices is very paramount, because your ordinary learners have access to this technology. But to make it available to your visual impaired is very expensive. So this initiative was an enabler to us as Council for the Blind and the Ministry to ensure that technology is available to the visual impaired.
As today we're marking the International Day for people living with disabilities, what are some of the challenges that people or disabled people face?
No, the major one is that of access. You can talk access to You talk to the infrastructure, access to service, access to even to access certain products. It depends on what disability you're referring to, especially for your visual impaired. The major access barrier that we're having is access to a written word, because you still have problems of textbooks to the school. You still have problems of blind learners having to access institutions of higher learning, learners or physical disabled having to access certain buildings which are not friendly to them. So even the attitude of people who are supposed to provide service to these individuals still remain a big challenge. But one should note that there's been some strides to make some services and some products accessible to persons with disabilities, but there's still some challenges like you have pointed out.
Yeah, and we have the partially sighted, we have the legally blind and the visually impaired. These are just some of the terms that are important, in the discourse of special needs children. I mean, earlier on this morning, I spoke to the Deputy Minister of Social Development, and she corrected me. She said that I should not refer to people with disabilities. Instead, I should say disabled people. Now, as the media, just how important is it to use the right terms that do not stigmatize?
Yeah, it's very critical, because when you look at the disability of a person before you can look at the person, then you are labeling a person in terms of the disability, and you put emphasis on the disability of a person, not the ability of a person. Because if you look at me as a person, then you can recognize that though having some disabilities or being disabled, I can still be able to achieve certain things. I don't appear as an object or subject that should receive assistance or cannot offer any assistance or make any difference as it's been in the past. So it's very critical that we are correct about these terms that you are using.
Yeah. And speaking of recognition, as you rightly pointed it out, just where are we in South Africa in terms of recognition of disabled people, in terms of appointing them to influential positions or positions of decision making?
Yeah, we have made some strides, but it's not obvious, because like you rightly pointed out, key positions, you still find disabled person being relegated to your minor positions that of receptionist, telephonist, and but we had that discourse when we were having our Tambo debate in terms of disabled persons, that we said, but you find that one has a Bikoma County, but it's been subjected to do a demeaning work of, I don't think even demeaning it's a right word, but the work that does not match the person's qualifications
and disabilities.
So, yes, but I must say, in terms of policy framework, we have done some major work as the country, looking at your white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities, which is meant to domesticate your UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. So in terms of policy, I would say we are okay, but in terms of implementing and seeing persons with disabilities benefiting from such intention of the policies, we still have some long way to go.
So what sort of resources are needed to assist blind people?
Assistive devices, like you said, with this initiative of the minister, it was a wonderful one, because to have a computer as a sighted person, that's what you need. You might need an operating office and what, but for a blind person to access such, you still need an adaptive software, and most of them, they are internationally based. So with the exchange rate, you will realize that you need 15,000 rands to be able to access a computer that you have bought maybe for 5,000 rands. So such barriers, assistive devices are very critical for your low vision to have desktop magnifiers or handheld magnifiers to access studies or to read for leisure. But those products are international, so they become very expensive. So to have this initiative that we had with the ministry, it was to make these things available to blind persons at the school level, so that at least the culture of having them around the country can be inculcated at the younger stage.
So with the non-availability and the lack of access to such infrastructure and resources that I've just mentioned, does that affect the performance of school learners in particular?
Very much.
And how so?
Very much. You'd realize that we have gone digital, things are so electronic, but if then we don't introduce our learners to this, they're deprived of even just communicating, sending emails, sending SMSs. I'm at a social level to access material on the net, to be able to write their assignments, to be able to write their tests, to study for tests. If we don't have such, because like I pointed out, the issue of textbooks is it's a disturbing one. But if you have this technology, learners will be able to access this book electronically, be able to study for their test, be able to write their exams, and they are now prepared for institution of higher learning, where almost things are electronic and they will be able to interact with such.
Mr. Matshwane, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much,
Great
sir.
chatting to you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that is Eugine Modori Matshwane, the Acting National Executive Director at the South African National Council for the Blind, about the gala dinner that was held to raise funds for the blind.